We'll focus on two things in this episode: route model binding, and as part of that, a general refactor and cleanup of our project's controller. Now, we still have a blank spot here for the show method. So before we get started on that, let's make sure that each of these projects are clickable. Okay, we'll do that very quickly. I'm going to return a view called projects, and we're following that same convention, show. However, show what project? Well, we need to track it down. So we can use the same code as we had from the edit method. I'll paste that in. We'll accept the project ID, and then we'll pass it to the view. Okay, that view doesn't yet exist. So I can say resources, views, projects, show.blade.php. And if you don't mind, let me quickly paste in what we are extending as well as the content section. Okay, so we need a heading for the title of the project. And let's give this a shot. So let's go to projects. I'm not sure what the ID is here yet. We'll just say 3. Yeah, so we have our family vacation, or I could go to 4, new hire. But I want to access these without having to manually update the URI. So let's make these clickable. Projects/index. And then for each list item, we'll wrap it within an anchor tag. The href will be projects/ and then once again, the project in the iteration, its ID. So for each project in our database, create a list item here. Let's go ahead and wrap that within a UL. And then for each item, we'll have an anchor tag that links to the project. Okay, so if we refresh, now I can click on these: family vacation and new hire. Let's add the details below it. So right here, I think there's a div with a class of content I can use with Bulma. So we can then say project description. And that's all we have at the moment. There we go. But you know what? Actually, on that note, we might want to add a edit link. And as we've learned, that'll go to projects/ the project ID / edit. All right, there we go. So we can hit the edit link and it takes us here. Excellent. So now we just have things a little bit more clean, a little more CRUD-like. So let's return to our controller and figure out which ways we can improve the code here. Let's start with this section right here. Whenever we show a project, we have to accept the ID as a wildcard. We then perform a query to find it, and we save it as a variable. However, as it turns out, Laravel has a feature called route model binding that will do this for you. So take a look. I'm going to, well, first, let's just return the project so you can see it the normal way. All right, here's the JSON we get. But let's remove this entirely. I will type hint project. And now, if I give this a refresh, I get the exact same thing. How cool is that? So what's happening here is behind the scenes, Laravel is picking up that we're trying to load a project, and it also knows there's a wildcard called project. So what's happening is it's putting 2 and 2 together. All right, well, I had this wildcard in the route called project, and then you've type hinted project here, so you probably want to fetch the project with that given ID. I'll go ahead and do that for you behind the scenes and pass it to your controller. It automatically gets resolved. It's really very, very cool stuff. Now you can configure this in a few ways. In some situations, you may not want to fetch by the ID. You might want to say, project, give me the one where the slug matches whatever we have here. That's all configurable. You can research Laravel route model binding. This is what you'll do. Here we go. And here's where you can control which key name we use, whether you want the ID, which is the default, or maybe something like a slug. But yeah, maybe when you're a little more advanced, you can research some of that. The cool thing, though, is you no longer have to do this. For example, here, we'll update this and clean up our code. The same thing here. And I can delete that. Finally, to destroy, I will fetch the project. And now we can just say project delete. Much cleaner, don't you think? All right, what else? Let's just scan this. Well, index, pretty simple, right? Find some projects, load a view. To show a project, we now accept it, and then we load a view. Very simple. Create, that couldn't be simpler. Store, I think we could do some work here. So when we hit the store method, we are going to persist a new project. So we do that by instantiating a new project. We then set the necessary fields and we persist it. However, as it turns out though, there is a project create method we could use instead. So take a look at this. I could say the title is whatever we had stored in the request, and the description is whatever was stored within the request. So as it turns out, this bit of code is equivalent to this. And in fact, we can even clean this up a little bit further. But before we do, I think we might see a little issue here. Let's give it a shot. Let's prepare a new project. We'll have to update the form here, but that's okay for the new styling. We'll create the project, and it does blow up. If you ever come across a mass assignment exception, this is Laravel's way of telling you, hey, I'm trying to protect you here, and it looks like you're trying to mass assign all of the attributes on the model. And if you're not careful, this can be an issue. Because what if somebody is manipulating the attributes that you pass? For example, you fetched all request data, you passed it to the create method, and you expected only a title and a description to be there, but somebody maliciously altered the form to update the ID, or the user's, for another example, the user's activation status. You didn't think you were updating that in the form, but because you passed all of the request data to user create or user update, they were able to do that without your knowledge. So Laravel, by default, protects you against this. Add title to the fillable property to allow mass assignment. So I'm going to show you some ways to handle this. We'll update our project model, and let's do exactly what it says. Add title to the fillable property. All right. We'll add a fillable property called title. Okay, now if we give it a refresh, it's still going to fail, but I bet it'll tell us to update the description, and it does. So now, because we didn't set description as a fillable field, well, we tried to pass it to the database, and now our database is squawking. So we could add description as well. These are the fillable fields for a project. Now, if I give it a refresh, it should work, and it does. So think of this as your way of saying, which fields am I okay with being mass assigned? Or we could do the inverse. We could say guarded. When we use this property, it's our way of saying, all right, accept everything except these fields that I want to guard, these fields that I don't want to be mass assignable. It's the exact opposite of fillable. So that means if I were to set it just like this, I could create a new project. Let's do a new one here. And there we go. So what that means is when we set guarded to an empty array, it's our way of saying, all right, Laravel, I know what I'm doing. I respect the help, but I can be in charge of this. I know what I'm doing here. And as long as that's true, you should be fine. And in my projects, this is usually what I do. All right, let's continue. Now, I noted we could simplify this a little bit more. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to return this array so you can see exactly what we get. So once more, let's make a new title and description, and there we go. We get the JSON form of this array. Or let's just die and dump that so we can see how it actually is. There we go. However, we could also say request, title, and description. So notice I'm calling the request function and I'm giving it an array. Let me show you a few variants here. Okay, notice we get the exact same thing there. So that means I can call the request function in a number of ways. For example, if I were to say request title and I give it a string, it'll give me back the string. Or, again, if I pass it as an array, we then get an array with the key properly set. So that means I could do this number here to be very specific about what I want to fetch. Or if you were to say request all, that's going to give me all of the request as an array. And now in this case, you can see we did get the token, but you would also get anything else that the user snuck in. For example, let's create a new project here, but I'm going to alter the form. So let's edit that as HTML, and I'm going to create another hidden input. Maybe ID. We're going to try to change ID or some other bit of private data that we don't want to expose. Okay, now if we submit the form, it looks like request data that we did not anticipate has been passed through. So this is the reason behind mass assignment protection. It's to keep you from accidentally fetching all request data, assuming it's one thing, but then the user maliciously sent through something else, and they're then, without your knowledge, modifying your database and records that should not be modified. Does that make sense? Because imagine, you don't want to just say project create request all, because then if you had guarded set to an empty array, or sending through that ID column, and we're going to update it. How about I just show you that actually? Let's get rid of this. And we'll just say return done here. Okay, so we're going to try to alter the ID. Give it a refresh. All right, and now if we go to SQL Pro, yep, the ID is now 10,000. So imagine if the user did that to something else. Imagine if they did that to your subscription level. So that's where, once again, I just want to drill this in because it can often be confusing at first. That's where if you did have fillable, this would give you protection there. Okay, so now we're saying the only fields that can be filled for this model are title and description. And even if you do this, and even if the user sends through something else, we're going to discard it entirely. Let's try that one more time. Projects create, new one, and yet again, if you'll bear with me, we will add another hidden input. ID, this time we will set it to 20,000. But when I submit it, it should be ignored entirely. Okay, let's go to SQL Pro, give it a refresh, and there we go. Now don't be confused by 10,001. Because the last one was 10,000, it will automatically increment by 1, but that is the correct behavior. The important thing is it was not set to 20,000. We discarded that entirely because of fillable fields. So what this means is, to drill it in one more time, you can get away with doing this, setting guarded to an empty array, as long as you are sure. And if you're on a team, be aware of this. As long as you are sure that you're never going to do anything like this. You're never going to pass a bunch of request data to project without knowing precisely what it is. If that's the case, I'd recommend be a cool kid, set guarded to an empty array, and then you're good to go. So if we take that approach, I can return to this, and now we've learned this can all be cleaned up like so. Request, give me the title and the description. And I hope you'll agree, that's a lot cleaner than what we had before. Let's do our final check. And there it is. Great. What else? The same is going to be true for updating an existing project. Instead, we could say project, and I'm going to call this method update, and we'll pass through the title and the description. So this will be equivalent to setting the attributes and persisting it. Much cleaner. So let's take a look at our full controller now. Every method is 1 or 2 lines of code, and that's what I like to see. When you start noticing controller methods that are 50 lines of code, there's probably, not always, sometimes it's just what you got to do, to be frank. But often, that might be a sign that there's some good refactoring you could do there. Each of these are super, super short. Take a look at all of this. I like it. So great job. You're starting to make really good progress at this point. In our routes file, we can now remove all of this. We've registered a resource for projects. This will configure and prepare all of the necessary routes for viewing a project, creating one, updating one, editing one, deleting one. All of those will be available. On our projects controller, we have all of those 7 methods that respond to each of those routes. So if I want to show a project, we use route model binding to accept it, and then we pass it to our view. If we want to update one, all right, fetch the project, call update, provide the new data, and then redirect when you're done. But at this point, there's still an issue. We're not performing an ounce of validation. So for example, let's edit any of these. And I'm just going to remove the description entirely. Well, if I hit update, it blows up because we tried to update the database to set the description field to an empty string. But on the MySQL end, we don't allow that. You have to give us a value. So it sounds like we need a layer in between. We need a validation layer that looks at those attributes. It makes sure that they are suitable for being saved to the database. And only once we have performed that check do we actually call the create method or the update method. We'll take a look at that in the next episode.